The sun was just starting to come up over Lake Winnebago. The water was calm and quiet. Most people were still sleeping in their beds. But Marcus Thompson was already out on the lake in his small fishing boat. He had been there since 5 in the morning. Marcus was a 45-year-old man with dark skin and kind eyes. He wore old blue jeans and a baseball cap that had seen better days. His shirt was simple and plain. Anyone looking at him would think he was just a regular fisherman trying to catch some fish before the day got busy. Marcus sat quietly in his boat. He was not really fishing for sport today. He had important work to do. In his hands he held a small device that could test the water. He was checking how clean the lake was. This was very important work, but most people would not know that just by looking at him. The morning air was cool and fresh. Marcus loved being on the water early like this. It was peaceful. The only sounds were small waves hitting his boat and birds starting to wake up. He worked carefully, taking water samples and writing notes on a clipboard. Marcus had all the right papers with him. He had permits that said he could be here. He had permission to test the water, but the papers were in a folder under his seat. He thought everything would be fine. He had done this many times before. Around 7 in the morning, Marcus heard the sound of a motorboat coming toward him. He looked up and saw a boat with 2 game wardens. Game wardens are people who make sure fishermen follow the rules. They check to see if people have fishing licenses and are fishing in the right places. The warden boat came up next to Marcus. The first warden was a young man named Officer Jenkins. He looked serious and official in his uniform. The second warden was older. His name was Officer Martinez. He had been doing this job for many years. "Good morning," Officer Jenkins called out. "We need to check your fishing license and see what you're doing out here." Marcus smiled and nodded. "Good morning, officers. I have all my papers right here." He reached under his seat to get his folder. Officer Jenkins looked around Marcus's boat. He saw the water testing equipment. "What's all this gear for?" he asked. His voice sounded suspicious. "I'm doing water quality testing," Marcus explained calmly. He pulled out his folder and started looking for the right papers. "I have permits for scientific research." Officer Martinez frowned. "Scientific research? You look like you're just fishing to me." He pointed to a fishing rod that was in the boat. Marcus always brought a fishing rod to make his work look normal. Marcus found his permits and held them out. "Here are my papers. They show I'm allowed to collect water samples in this area." But Officer Jenkins did not take the papers right away. Instead, he looked at a map. "Sir, you're in a restricted area. No fishing is allowed here during spawning season." Marcus felt his heart beat a little faster. He knew he was in the right place. His permit said he could be here. "Officer, if you look at my permits, you'll see I have permission to work in this exact area." Officer Martinez called on his radio. "We have a situation out here. Man claims to have research permits, but he's in the restricted zone." "I'm not claiming anything," Marcus said, still trying to stay calm. "I really do have the right permits. Please just look at them." But the officers seemed to have already made up their minds. They did not want to look at his papers carefully. Officer Jenkins kept looking at the fishing rod and the simple way Marcus was dressed. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us," Officer Martinez said. "You're fishing illegally in a protected area." Marcus felt confused and frustrated. "I'm not fishing illegally. I'm doing scientific work. Please just look at my permits." "Sir, calm down," Officer Jenkins said, even though Marcus was speaking in a normal voice. "I am calm," Marcus replied. "I just want you to look at my documents." Officer Martinez called for backup on his radio. "We might need some help out here. The subject is getting agitated." Marcus could not believe what was happening. He was not agitated. He was just trying to show them his papers. But now more boats were coming. Soon there were 4 officers on the water around his small boat. The first backup officer was named Sergeant Wilson. He was a big man with a loud voice. "What's the problem here?" he asked. "Man was fishing in the restricted area," Officer Jenkins explained. "Claims he has research permits but won't cooperate." "I am cooperating," Marcus said. He was starting to feel worried now. "I have been trying to show you my permits this whole time." Sergeant Wilson looked at Marcus and then at his simple clothes and old boat. "Sir, step out of your boat." "We need to search it." Marcus knew his rights. "Officer, I don't think you need to search my boat. I have done nothing wrong. Please just look at my permits first." "Sir, you need to comply with our orders," Sergeant Wilson said in a stern voice. Marcus felt trapped. He was surrounded by 4 officers in boats. He was alone on the water. He knew that if he did not do what they said, things would get worse. So he carefully stepped from his boat onto the warden's boat. The officers searched his boat and found his water testing equipment. They also found the fishing rod. They did not spend much time looking at his permits. They seemed to think the fishing rod proved he was fishing illegally. "Sir, you're under arrest for illegal fishing in a restricted area," Sergeant Wilson announced. He put handcuffs on Marcus. Marcus could not believe this was happening. "Officers, there has been a mistake. I have all the right permits. I'm doing important work here." "You can explain that to the judge," Officer Martinez said. They put Marcus in one of the warden boats and took his boat with them. As they drove back to shore, Marcus sat quietly. He was thinking about how this had all gone wrong so quickly. He had all the right papers. He was doing important work to help the lake. But the officers had not listened to him. Marcus was also thinking about something else. This was not the first time something like this had happened to him. People often looked at him and made assumptions. They saw a black man in simple clothes and thought they knew who he was and what he was doing. When they got to shore, more police officers were waiting. They took Marcus to the police station. They asked him questions and took his fingerprints. They put him in a jail cell to wait. Marcus sat in the small cell and thought about his work. The lake needed the water testing he was doing. It was part of a big project to make the lake cleaner and healthier. But now he was in jail instead of doing that important work. He also thought about his family. His wife would be worried when he did not come home. His children would not understand why their father was in jail. Marcus had worked hard his whole life to build a good life for his family. Now he was sitting in a jail cell because of a misunderstanding. The hours passed slowly. Marcus waited to see what would happen next. He hoped someone would look at his permits carefully. He hoped they would realize their mistake. But as the day went on, he began to worry that things might not be that simple. Marcus Thompson had no idea that this arrest would change everything. He did not know that soon the whole world would learn his story. All he knew was that he was in trouble for doing work that was supposed to help the environment. The irony of the situation was not lost on him, but he could not have imagined how much bigger this story would become. 3 weeks after his arrest, Marcus Thompson sat in the courthouse waiting room. He wore clean khaki pants and a plain button-down shirt. These were some of his nicer clothes, but they were still simple and ordinary. Marcus had spent those 3 weeks out on bail, but the experience had been difficult for him and his family. His wife, Sarah, had been worried sick. She could not understand how her husband could be arrested for doing his work. Their children asked questions that were hard to answer. Why was Daddy in trouble? Why did the police not believe him? Marcus tried to explain, but it was complicated even for adults to understand. Marcus had thought about hiring an expensive lawyer. He could afford the best legal help in the country. But he wanted to see if the system would work fairly for someone who looked like a regular person. He wanted to see if his permits and evidence would speak for themselves. So he decided to use the public defender who was assigned to his case. The public defender was a young woman named Lisa Chen. She was fresh out of law school and had too many cases to handle. When she met with Marcus, she seemed tired and overwhelmed. She had only spent 30 minutes looking at his case file. "Mr. Thompson," she had said during their brief meeting, "the charges against you are pretty straightforward: illegal fishing in a restricted area. The officers say you were fishing where you were not supposed to be fishing." Marcus had tried to explain about his permits and his scientific work. He showed her all his documentation, but Lisa seemed distracted. She was already thinking about her next case. "The best I can probably do is get you a reduced sentence," she told him. "Maybe community service instead of jail time." Marcus felt frustrated. Lisa did not seem to understand that he had done nothing wrong. She was already planning to make a deal instead of fighting the charges. But Marcus decided to trust the system. He hoped that once they were in court, the truth would come out. Now Marcus sat in the courthouse waiting for his name to be called. The building was old and serious looking. People in suits walked back and forth carrying important papers. Marcus felt out of place in his simple clothes. The courtroom was room number 204. When Marcus's name was called, he walked in with Lisa Chen. The room was not very big. There were wooden benches for people to sit on. At the front was a tall desk where the judge would sit. Everything looked official and intimidating. Judge Patricia Whitman entered the courtroom. She was 58 years old with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore black robes and looked very serious. Judge Whitman had been a judge for 15 years. She was known for being tough on crime and not having patience for excuses. Judge Whitman sat down at her high desk and looked down at the papers in front of her. She barely glanced at Marcus. To her, he looked like every other defendant who came through her courtroom. Simple clothes, probably unemployed, probably making excuses for breaking the law. Case number 2024-578, the court clerk announced. State versus Marcus Thompson. Illegal fishing in a restricted area. Judge Whitman looked at Marcus for the first time. She saw a middle-aged black man in plain clothes. She had seen hundreds of cases like this. People who did not follow the rules and then tried to make excuses when they got caught. Mr. Thompson, Judge Whitman said in a stern voice, how do you plead to the charge of illegal fishing in a restricted area? Lisa Chen stood up. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. We believe there has been a misunderstanding. Judge Whitman frowned. She did not like it when defendants pled not guilty to obvious crimes. Mr. Thompson, you were caught fishing in an area where fishing is not allowed. The officers found you with fishing equipment. What exactly is the misunderstanding? Marcus stood up. He wanted to explain everything clearly. Your Honor, I was not fishing for sport. I was conducting water quality research. I have permits that allow me to collect water samples in that area. Judge Whitman looked annoyed. Mr. Thompson, everyone who gets caught fishing illegally has an excuse. You had a fishing rod in your boat. You were in an area where fishing is prohibited. The facts seem very clear to me. But, Your Honor, Marcus said politely, if you would look at my permits, you would see that I have permission to be in that area for scientific research. Judge Whitman was already losing patience. She dealt with dozens of cases every day. She did not have time to listen to long explanations. Mr. Thompson, I have heard every excuse in the book. The officers found you fishing where you should not have been fishing. That is all I need to know. Lisa Chen tried to help. Your Honor, my client has documentation that shows he was conducting legitimate research. Ms. Chen, Judge Whitman said sharply, your client can present his evidence when it is his turn to speak. Right now I want to hear from the prosecution. The prosecutor was a man named David Rogers. He had been a prosecutor for 10 years. He stood up and spoke in a confident voice. Your Honor, this is a simple case. The defendant was found fishing in a restricted area during spawning season. He had fishing equipment in his boat. The game wardens were doing their job when they arrested him. The defendant may claim he was doing research, but that does not change the fact that he was in a prohibited area with fishing gear. Judge Whitman nodded. This was exactly what she expected to hear. Cut and dried. Simple case. Marcus felt frustrated. The prosecutor was not telling the whole story. He was making it sound like Marcus was just a regular person who got caught breaking the rules. Marcus wanted to stand up and explain everything, but he knew he had to wait for his turn. Finally, Judge Whitman said, Mr. Thompson, you may present your defense. Marcus stood up again. He pulled out his folder of permits and documents. Your Honor, I have here all the permits I need to conduct water quality research in that area of the lake. I was not fishing for sport. I was collecting water samples as part of an environmental study. Judge Whitman looked at her watch. She had 6 more cases to get through before lunch. Mr. Thompson, do you have a fishing license? Yes, Your Honor, but that is not why I was there. I was doing scientific research. And you had fishing equipment in your boat? Yes, but only to blend in. I always bring a fishing rod so people do not ask questions about what I'm doing. Judge Whitman shook her head. This sounded like nonsense to her. Mr. Thompson, you admit you had fishing equipment and you were in a restricted area. I do not see how your claims about research change those basic facts. Marcus tried again. Your Honor, may I show you my permits? They clearly state that I am authorized to collect water samples in that exact location. Judge Whitman held up her hand. Mr. Thompson, I have heard enough. The facts are clear. You were in a restricted area with fishing equipment during a time when fishing is prohibited. Your story about research does not change those facts. Marcus felt his heart sinking. The judge was not listening to him. She had already made up her mind. Lisa Chen looked like she wanted to say something, but she also looked defeated. Your Honor, Lisa said weakly, perhaps we could examine the permits my client mentioned. Judge Whitman looked annoyed. Ms. Chen, your client was caught red-handed. A permit to do research does not give someone the right to fish in a prohibited area. Marcus wanted to explain that he was not fishing. He wanted to show his GPS records that proved exactly where he had been. He wanted to explain about the important environmental work he was doing. But Judge Whitman was not interested in hearing any of it. The judge looked at Marcus with disapproval. She saw a man who she thought was trying to get out of trouble with a creative excuse. She had heard stories like this before. People who claimed they were doing research or had special permission when they got caught breaking the law. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Whitman said in a final tone, "you have been found guilty of illegal fishing in a restricted area. This court does not tolerate people who think the rules do not apply to them." Marcus felt shocked. He had not even had a real trial. The judge had not looked at his evidence. She had not listened to his explanation. She had decided he was guilty before he even had a chance to defend himself. Judge Whitman continued, "You are sentenced to 30 days in county jail, a fine of $5,000, and 1 year of probation. Maybe this will teach you to respect our natural resources and follow the law." Marcus stood there in stunned silence. He could not believe what had just happened. He was being punished for trying to protect the environment. He was going to jail for doing important scientific work. The irony was almost too much to bear. Lisa Chen looked embarrassed and helpless. She had not done a good job defending her client, but she was overwhelmed and inexperienced. She whispered to Marcus, "I am sorry. We can appeal this decision." Marcus just nodded quietly. He felt disappointed in the justice system, but he was not angry. He was sad that Judge Whitman had not been willing to listen. He was sad that his important work would be delayed. Most of all, he was sad that this kind of thing happened to people every day. As the court moved on to the next case, Marcus walked out of the courtroom a convicted criminal. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but the system had decided otherwise. He had no idea that this injustice would soon lead to something much bigger than anyone could imagine. After Judge Whitman announced the guilty verdict, Marcus Thompson stood in the courtroom feeling numb. 30 days in jail, $5,000 fine, and 1 year of probation for work that was supposed to help the lake and the environment. The weight of the injustice pressed down on him like a heavy stone. Marcus had one more chance to speak. He still had his GPS device from his boat. This device showed exactly where he had been on the lake. It would prove that he was in the right place doing legal research work. He hoped this evidence might change the judge's mind. "Your Honor," Marcus said respectfully, "I have GPS data from my boat that shows my exact location during the time of my arrest. This data proves I was within the boundaries allowed by my research permits." Judge Whitman looked up from her papers with an expression of annoyance. She had already made her decision. She did not want to hear more excuses from this defendant. "Mr. Thompson, I have heard quite enough from you today," she said sharply. "You were caught fishing illegally, and that is the end of the matter." "But, Your Honor, the GPS data is scientific evidence. It shows exactly where I was and proves I was following the law," Marcus continued. He pulled out a small device and held it up so the judge could see it. Judge Whitman barely glanced at the GPS device. She waved her hand dismissively. "Mr. Thompson, I am not interested in looking at more of your so-called evidence. You had fishing equipment in a restricted area. That is all I need to know." Marcus felt desperate. This GPS data was proof of his innocence. Any reasonable person would want to look at it. "Your Honor, this will only take a minute to review. The coordinates clearly show—" "Enough!" Judge Whitman interrupted loudly. Her voice echoed through the courtroom. "Mr. Thompson, I have made my decision. I am not going to waste this court's time looking at gadgets and listening to more elaborate stories." Marcus tried one more time. "Your Honor, I also have photographs that show the scientific equipment in my boat. I have documentation from the Department of Natural Resources. I have permits signed by state officials. Please just look at one piece of evidence." Judge Whitman slammed her gavel down hard on her desk. The sound was sharp and final. Several people in the courtroom jumped at the noise. "Mr. Thompson, you are testing this court's patience. I have heard enough excuses for 1 day. The sentence stands. 30 days in jail, $5,000 fine, 1 year probation. This is a lesson in respecting our natural resources and following the law." Marcus felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. The judge was not going to look at any of his evidence. She had decided he was guilty before the trial even started. She was not interested in the truth. Lisa Chen, his public defender, looked embarrassed and defeated. She knew her client had evidence that could help his case, but she did not know how to make the judge listen. She was too inexperienced to stand up strongly to Judge Whitman. Your Honor, Lisa said weakly, perhaps we could take a brief recess to examine the GPS evidence. Judge Whitman glared at Lisa. Ms. Chen, your client has wasted enough of this court's time with his stories. We are moving on to the next case. The defendant will surrender himself to the county jail within 48 hours to begin serving his sentence. Marcus stood quietly as the judge spoke. He did not argue anymore. He did not raise his voice. He simply accepted what was happening with a dignity that surprised everyone in the courtroom. Most people would be angry or upset or begging for mercy, but Marcus just nodded calmly. The court clerk called the next case. State versus Jennifer Williams, driving without a license. Marcus gathered his papers and his GPS device. He put everything back in his folder carefully. He shook hands with Lisa Chen and thanked her for trying to help him. Then he walked toward the back of the courtroom to leave. As Marcus walked through the courtroom, several people watched him. There was something unusual about the way he carried himself. He did not look angry or defeated. He looked disappointed but not surprised. It was as if this kind of treatment was something he had experienced before. Jenny Martinez, a court reporter who worked in the courthouse, noticed Marcus's unusual behavior. Jenny was 35 years old and had been reporting court cases for 10 years. She had seen thousands of people get sentenced in this courtroom. Most of them cried or got angry or begged for another chance. But Marcus Thompson was different. Jenny watched as Marcus walked calmly out of the courtroom. He moved with quiet dignity. His shoulders were straight. His head was up. He looked like a man who was disappointed but not broken. This made Jenny curious. After the court session ended, Jenny thought about Marcus's case. She had typed every word of the trial. She remembered how Judge Whitman had refused to look at any of his evidence. She remembered how he had tried politely to show his GPS data and permits. She also remembered how calm and respectful he had been throughout the whole process. Jenny had seen Judge Whitman handle thousands of cases. The judge was known for being tough, but she was usually fair. She normally looked at evidence when defendants presented it, but today Judge Whitman had seemed unusually dismissive and impatient with Marcus Thompson. Something about the whole situation bothered Jenny. Marcus Thompson did not act like most people who got caught breaking the law. Most guilty people got angry or made emotional pleas or blamed someone else. But Marcus had been calm and factual. He had specific evidence he wanted to show. He had official-looking documents and scientific equipment. Jenny also noticed that Marcus's story was very detailed and consistent. Most people who made up excuses told stories that changed or did not make sense. But Marcus had given the same explanation from the beginning. He said he was doing water quality research. He said he had permits. He said he had GPS proof of his location. The more Jenny thought about it, the more curious she became. What if Marcus Thompson was telling the truth? What if he really did have permits to do research in that area? What if the arrest was a mistake? Jenny decided she wanted to know more about this case. She was a good reporter, and she had a nose for stories that did not add up. Something about Marcus Thompson seemed different from the usual defendants who came through this courtroom. That evening, Jenny went home to her small apartment and thought about what she had seen. She lived alone with her cat, and she often spent her evenings reading or watching television. But tonight she could not stop thinking about Marcus Thompson. Jenny had grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else. She had learned that things were not always what they seemed on the surface. Sometimes good people got in trouble for the wrong reasons. Sometimes the system made mistakes. She also knew that people were often treated differently based on how they looked or dressed. She had seen it happen in the courtroom many times. Well-dressed defendants with expensive lawyers often got better treatment than poor defendants with public defenders. This was just the way things worked, even though it was not supposed to be that way. Marcus Thompson had been dressed simply. He had an overworked public defender. He was a black man in a mostly white community. Jenny wondered if these things had affected how Judge Whitman treated his case. The more Jenny thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong with what had happened in court that day. Judge Whitman had been unusually harsh and dismissive. She had refused to look at evidence that might have helped the defendant. This was not normal, even for a tough judge. Jenny made a decision. She was going to do some research on Marcus Thompson. She wanted to find out if his story was true. She wanted to know if he really had permits to do research on the lake. She wanted to see if there was more to this story than what had happened in the courtroom. Jenny was not an investigative reporter. She was just a court reporter who typed up what happened in trials, but she had access to court records and public documents. She knew how to research cases and look up information. She decided to use these skills to learn more about Marcus Thompson. As Jenny got ready for bed that night, she felt excited about her plan. She had a feeling that there was a bigger story here. She did not know yet just how big this story would become. She did not know that her curiosity would soon change everything for Marcus Thompson and Judge Whitman. All Jenny knew was that something did not feel right about what had happened in court that day. A man had been sentenced to jail for what he said was scientific research. A judge had refused to look at evidence that might prove his innocence. This seemed wrong to Jenny, and she wanted to find out the truth. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson went home to his family. He hugged his wife and children and tried to explain what had happened. He told them he would have to go to jail for a month, but that everything would be okay. He did not tell them how frustrated and disappointed he felt. He did not want to worry them more than they already were. Marcus knew that in 48 hours he would have to report to the county jail. He would spend 30 days locked up for doing work that was supposed to help the environment. The irony was bitter, but Marcus was not a bitter man. He believed that eventually the truth would come out. He just did not know how soon that would happen. Jenny Martinez could not stop thinking about Marcus Thompson. 2 days had passed since his sentencing, and something about his case kept bothering her. She had covered thousands of court cases in her 10 years as a court reporter, but this one felt different. There was something about Marcus's calm dignity and his specific claims that made her want to dig deeper. Jenny worked at the courthouse during the day, but in the evenings she had time to do research. She decided to start by looking up the basic facts about Marcus's case. She had access to court records and police reports through her job, so she could see exactly what the officers had written about the arrest. The first thing Jenny did was read the police report carefully. She had typed it during the trial, but now she read it slowly, looking for details she might have missed. The report said that Marcus was found in his boat at 7:15 a.m. on Lake Winnebago. He was in an area marked as restricted during spawning season. The officers found fishing equipment in his boat, but as Jenny read more carefully, she noticed some things that seemed odd. The report mentioned that Marcus had various electronic devices in his boat, but it did not explain what these devices were. The officers had written that Marcus claimed to be doing scientific research, but they had not investigated this claim. Jenny also noticed that the report said Marcus had several official-looking documents, but the officers had not examined these documents carefully. They had decided he was fishing illegally and arrested him without really looking at his evidence. This seemed strange to Jenny. Usually, if someone claimed to have permits or official permission to do something, the police would check those documents carefully, but in this case, they seemed to have made up their minds very quickly. Jenny decided to find out more about the restricted area where Marcus was arrested. She looked up the regulations for Lake Winnebago. The lake had several restricted zones during spawning season to protect fish populations. But Jenny discovered that there were exceptions to these restrictions. Scientists and researchers could get special permits to work in these areas. This made Jenny even more curious. Marcus had claimed to have research permits. The lake regulations did allow for research permits in restricted areas, so maybe Marcus had been telling the truth. Jenny's next step was to try to find out more about Marcus Thompson himself. She started by looking him up online. At first, she just found basic information. Marcus Thompson, age 45, lived in the area, no criminal record. But then Jenny tried different search terms. She tried Marcus Thompson water research and found nothing. She tried Marcus Thompson environmental and got a few small mentions. But then she tried Marcus T. Thompson and suddenly found much more information. The first thing that came up was a company website for Thompson Environmental Solutions. Jenny clicked on the link and could not believe what she was reading. Marcus T. Thompson was not just any regular person. He was the founder and CEO of a major environmental company. Jenny read the company's website carefully. Thompson Environmental Solutions was described as a leading innovator in water treatment technology. The company had projects in 30 states. They specialized in cleaning polluted waterways and improving water quality. Jenny scrolled down to read about the company's founder. There was a professional photograph of Marcus T. Thompson in a business suit. It was definitely the same man she had seen in court, but he looked very different and expensive, clothes and a professional setting. The website said that Marcus T. Thompson had a PhD in environmental engineering from MIT. He had founded his company 15 years ago. The company had annual revenues of over $500 million. Marcus himself was listed as one of the top environmental innovators in the country. Jenny felt her heart racing. This could not be the same person who had been sentenced to jail for illegal fishing. But the photograph was definitely the same man. She looked at the photo again and again to make sure Jenny kept reading. The website mentioned that Marcus T. Thompson was working on several major lake restoration projects around the country. One of these projects was described as a comprehensive restoration of Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin. Jenny sat back in her chair, stunned. Marcus Thompson was working on restoring Lake Winnebago. That was the same lake where he had been arrested. He was not just some random person fishing illegally. He was a billionaire environmental scientist working to clean up that exact lake. Jenny searched for more information about the Lake Winnebago project. She found a press release from 2 years ago announcing a partnership between Thompson Environmental Solutions and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The project was described as a $50 million effort to restore water quality in Lake Winnebago. According to the press release, the project included extensive water quality monitoring and testing. The work was being done in cooperation with state agencies and had all proper permits and approvals. Marcus T. Thompson was personally overseeing the project. Jenny felt like she was putting together pieces of a puzzle. Marcus had been arrested while doing water quality testing on Lake Winnebago. He had claimed to have research permits. He had scientific equipment in his boat. Now Jenny discovered that he was actually leading a major restoration project for that same lake. Jenny searched for more information about Marcus's wealth. She found several business magazines that had written about him. Forbes magazine had listed him as one of the richest environmental entrepreneurs in America. His net worth was estimated at over $2.3 billion. Jenny could hardly believe what she was reading. A billionaire environmental scientist had been arrested for doing research on a lake that he was paying to restore. He had been sentenced to jail by a judge who refused to look at his evidence. This was not just a mistake. This was a huge injustice. Jenny kept digging for more information. She found articles about Marcus's charitable work. He had donated over $100 million to environmental causes in the past decade. He often worked anonymously, not wanting publicity for his donations. He preferred to let his work speak for itself. Jenny also found information about Marcus's technology. His company had developed new methods for cleaning polluted water that were being used around the world. His innovations had helped restore rivers and lakes that had been damaged by pollution. He was considered a hero by environmental groups. The more Jenny learned, the more shocked she became. Marcus Thompson was one of the most important environmental scientists in the country. He was spending his own money to clean up lakes and rivers. He had dedicated his life to protecting the environment. And he had been sentenced to jail for the very work he was famous for. Jenny realized that this was not just a local court case. This was a major story with national importance. A billionaire philanthropist had been treated like a common criminal because of how he looked and dressed. The justice system had failed in a spectacular way. Jenny thought about Judge Whitman's behavior in court. The judge had been dismissive and impatient with Marcus. She had refused to look at his evidence. She had treated him like he was lying when he tried to explain his work. Judge Whitman had seen a simply dressed black man and had made assumptions about who he was and what he was doing. Jenny also thought about the police officers who had arrested Marcus. They had found scientific equipment in his boat, but they had not investigated what it was for. They had found official documents, but they had not read them carefully. They had made quick judgments based on appearances. Jenny knew that she had stumbled onto something big. This story was about more than just one person being treated unfairly. It was about how the justice system treated people differently based on race and class. It was about how assumptions and prejudices could lead to serious injustices. Jenny decided that she had to do something with this information. She was not an investigative reporter, but she knew reporters who were. She had friends who worked for newspapers and television stations. This story needed to be told. But first, Jenny wanted to verify everything she had learned. She wanted to make sure all her facts were correct. She spent the next several hours checking and double-checking every piece of information she had found. Jenny called the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and asked about research permits for Lake Winnebago. She spoke to a clerk who confirmed that Thompson Environmental Solutions had active permits for water quality research in the lake. The permits were valid and up to date. Jenny also called Thompson Environmental Solutions. She spoke to a receptionist who confirmed that Marcus T. Thompson was the CEO and that he was personally involved in the Lake Winnebago project. The receptionist seemed surprised that anyone was asking about Mr. Thompson's arrest. By the end of the evening, Jenny had confirmed everything. Marcus Thompson was exactly who he claimed to be. He had the permits he said he had. He was doing the work he said he was doing. He had been arrested and convicted for legitimate scientific research that he was paying for with his own money. Jenny knew that this story would change everything for Marcus Thompson. It would also change things for Judge Whitman and the police officers involved. But most importantly, it might help prevent this kind of injustice from happening to other people in the future. As Jenny prepared to contact her reporter friends, she felt both excited and nervous. Jenny Martinez spent the next day gathering even more information about Marcus Thompson and his work. What she discovered was even more amazing than what she had found the night before. The more she dug into the story, the more incredible it became. Jenny started by contacting the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources directly. She spoke to Dr. Patricia Wells, who was the head of the lake restoration program. Dr. Wells was shocked when Jenny told her about Marcus's arrest and conviction. "That's impossible," Dr. Wells said over the phone. "Mr. Thompson has been working with us for over 2 years. He has all the proper permits. He's actually one of our most important partners in the Lake Winnebago restoration project." Dr. Wells explained that Marcus had approached the state 2 years ago with an offer to fund a major restoration of Lake Winnebago. The lake had been suffering from pollution and declining water quality for decades. Marcus had offered to pay for the entire project out of his own pocket. "He's putting $50 million of his own money into this project," Dr. Wells told Jenny. "It's the largest privately funded environmental restoration in our state's history. Mr. Thompson is a hero, not a criminal." Jenny asked Dr. Wells about the area where Marcus was arrested. Dr. Wells confirmed that this area was part of the research zone that Marcus had permission to work in. His permit specifically allowed him to collect water samples and conduct testing in that exact location. "The area where he was arrested is actually the most important part of our research," Dr. Wells explained. "We've been monitoring water quality there every week for the past year. Mr. Thompson often does the testing himself because he's so dedicated to the project." Jenny was amazed by what she was hearing. Marcus had been arrested for working in an area where he was not only allowed to be, but where he was doing critically important environmental work that he was paying for himself. Dr. Wells also told Jenny something that made the story even more incredible. The fishing equipment that the police had found in Marcus's boat was actually scientific equipment disguised to look like normal fishing gear. Marcus often used this disguise so that people would not bother him while he was working. "Mr. Thompson is very private about his work," Dr. Wells said. "He doesn't like publicity. He prefers to work quietly without drawing attention to himself. That's why he dresses simply and uses equipment that looks like regular fishing gear." Jenny learned that Marcus had developed this strategy after years of being interrupted by curious people while he was trying to work. When people saw expensive scientific equipment, they would ask questions and sometimes interfere with his research. So Marcus had learned to blend in by looking like a regular fisherman. Jenny asked Dr. Wells why Marcus had not simply explained this to the police when he was arrested. Dr. Wells sighed sadly. "Mr. Thompson has dealt with situations like this before," she said. "Unfortunately, people often don't believe him when he explains who he is and what he's doing. He's learned that sometimes it's easier to just go through the legal process and sort things out later." This made Jenny feel even sadder about what had happened. Marcus had not fought harder to defend himself because he had experienced this kind of treatment before. He had learned to expect that people would not believe him or take him seriously. Jenny's next step was to research Marcus's charitable work more deeply. What she found was extraordinary. Marcus had been quietly donating millions of dollars to environmental causes for years. Most of his donations were anonymous, so very few people knew about his generosity. Jenny found records showing that Marcus had donated money to clean up polluted rivers in 5 different states. He had funded research into new water treatment technologies at 3 major universities. He had paid for environmental education programs in dozens of schools. In total, Marcus had donated over $100 million to environmental causes in the past decade. This was separate from his business work. These were personal donations that came from his own pocket, with no expectation of profit or recognition. Jenny also discovered that Marcus's company had created thousands of jobs around the country. Thompson Environmental Solutions employed over 2,000 people in offices and research facilities in 15 states. The company's technology was being used to clean up polluted water in over 200 locations. The irony of the situation was overwhelming. Marcus Thompson had dedicated his life to protecting the environment. He had spent his own money and his company's resources to clean up polluted lakes and rivers. He had created jobs and developed technology that was helping to solve environmental problems around the world. And now he was sitting in a county jail, convicted of harming the environment. He was being punished for the very work that had made him famous among environmental scientists and activists. Jenny contacted several environmental organizations to ask about Marcus's reputation. Every person she spoke to had nothing but praise for him. Dr. Sarah Johnson from the National Clean Water Alliance called him one of the most important environmental innovators of our time. Marcus Thompson has done more for water quality in America than almost anyone else. Dr. Johnson told Jenny, his technology has cleaned up waterways that were considered beyond saving. He's a quiet hero who works behind the scenes to make the world a better place. Professor Mike Chen from the University of Wisconsin's Environmental Science Department was equally enthusiastic about Marcus's work. The Lake Winnebago restoration project is groundbreaking, he said. Mr. Thompson is using cutting-edge technology that he developed himself. This project could serve as a model for lake restoration around the world. Jenny learned that Marcus's work on Lake Winnebago was particularly important because the lake had been severely polluted for decades. Industrial waste and agricultural runoff had damaged the lake's ecosystem. Fish populations had declined, and the water quality had become dangerous. Marcus's restoration project was designed to reverse this damage. His company had developed new techniques for removing pollutants from water and restoring natural ecosystem balance. The project was expected to take 5 years to complete, but early results were already showing improvement in water quality. The area where Marcus was arrested was actually the most polluted part of the lake. This was where the restoration work was most critically needed. Marcus had been collecting water samples to monitor the progress of the cleanup efforts. Jenny realized that Marcus's arrest had probably delayed this important work. While he was dealing with legal problems and spending time in jail, the lake restoration project was being put on hold. This meant that the environment was actually being harmed by his conviction, not protected by it. Jenny also discovered that Marcus's conviction could have serious implications for the entire restoration project. His company's contract with the state required him to personally oversee certain aspects of the work. If he was unable to do this because of his criminal conviction, the entire $50 million project might be in jeopardy. This added another layer of injustice to the situation. Not only had an innocent man been convicted, but his conviction might prevent important environmental work from being completed. The very lake that the judge claimed to be protecting might suffer because of her decision. As Jenny compiled all this information, she realized that she had uncovered one of the most shocking injustices she had ever encountered. A billionaire environmental hero had been treated like a common criminal. A man who was spending his own money to protect the environment had been convicted of environmental crimes. A project that could serve as a model for environmental restoration around the world was being threatened by a miscarriage of justice. Jenny knew that this story needed to be told immediately. Every day that passed was another day that Marcus sat in jail for doing work that should have earned him praise, not punishment. Every day was another day that important environmental work was delayed because of prejudice and misunderstanding. Jenny decided to contact her friend Maria Santos, who was an investigative reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Maria had won awards for her reporting on social justice issues. If anyone could tell this story properly, it was Maria. When Jenny called Maria and started explaining what she had discovered, Maria could hardly believe it. "You're telling me that a billionaire environmental scientist is sitting in jail for doing research on a lake that he's paying to restore?" Maria asked. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Jenny replied. And it gets worse. The judge refused to look at any of his evidence. She treated him like he was lying when he tried to explain who he was and what he was doing. Maria was quiet for a moment as she processed this information. Then she said, "Jenny, this is huge. This isn't just a local story. This is a national story about justice and prejudice and environmental protection. I need to see all your research immediately." Jenny sent Maria all the information she had gathered. She included copies of court documents, police reports, company websites, and academic articles about Marcus's work. She also provided contact information for all the people she had interviewed. Within hours, Maria called Jenny back. "I've verified everything you found, and I've found even more. This story is even bigger than we thought. I'm going to write this up and get it published as soon as possible." Maria Santos worked through the night to write the story that would change everything. As an experienced investigative reporter, she knew how to present the facts in a way that would capture people's attention and make them understand the importance of what had happened. The headline Maria chose was simple but powerful. "Billionaire environmentalist, jailed for testing water quality in his own restoration project." She knew that this headline would make people stop and read the story because it seemed almost impossible to believe. Maria's article began with a description of Marcus sitting in court dressed in simple clothes, trying to show his permits to a judge who refused to look at them. She then revealed the shocking truth about who Marcus really was and what he had been doing on the lake. The article explained Marcus's background as a successful entrepreneur and environmental scientist. It described his company's important work and his personal donations to environmental causes. It detailed the Lake Winnebago Restoration Project and Marcus's role in funding and overseeing the work. Maria also included quotes from Dr. Patricia Wells and other officials who confirmed that Marcus had proper permits for his research. She quoted environmental scientists who praised Marcus's work and called him a hero for his contributions to water quality restoration. The article was published online at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Within 1 hour, it had been shared over 1,000 times on social media. By noon, it had been shared over 50,000 times. People could not believe what they were reading. The story spread across the internet like wildfire. People were shocked by the injustice of the situation. They were amazed to learn about Marcus's wealth and his environmental work. They were angry about how he had been treated by the police and the judge. Twitter exploded with comments about the story. People used hashtags like #NarJusticeForMarcus and #MarEnvironmentalHero to share their outrage. Celebrities and politicians began sharing the article and commenting on the injustice. Environmental activist Greta Thunberg tweeted, "This story shows how prejudice can harm both people and the planet. Marcus Thompson should be celebrated, not jailed, for his environmental work." Actor Leonardo DiCaprio, who was known for his environmental activism, shared the article with his millions of followers. He wrote, "This is exactly the kind of person we need more of in the world. Instead, he's sitting in jail because of ignorance and bias." By the end of the first day, the story had been picked up by major news networks. CNN ran a segment about Marcus's case during their evening news. The reporter interviewed Dr. Wells and showed footage of the Lake Winnebago restoration work. MSNBC invited environmental law experts to discuss the case. The experts explained how Marcus's conviction could set a dangerous precedent for other environmental researchers. They worried that scientists might be afraid to do important work if they could be arrested for it. Fox News covered the story from a different angle, focusing on the failure of the justice system. They interviewed legal experts who criticized Judge Whitman's handling of the case. The experts said that the judge had made serious errors by refusing to examine evidence. The story also made the front page of major newspapers across the country. The New York Times ran an editorial calling for an investigation into how the case had been handled. The Washington Post published an opinion piece about racial bias in the justice system. Environmental organizations quickly rallied around Marcus's cause. The Sierra Club issued a statement calling his conviction a travesty of justice. Greenpeace organized online protests, demanding his immediate release from jail. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, also got involved. They pointed out that Marcus's case was an example of how black men were often treated unfairly by the justice system, regardless of their wealth or status. Legal experts began analyzing the case in detail. They found multiple problems with how the arrest and trial had been handled. Professor Janet Miller from Harvard Law School wrote a detailed analysis showing all the legal errors that had been made. This case is a textbook example of how prejudice can corrupt the justice process, Professor Miller wrote. The defendant was denied due process at every step. His evidence was ignored, his explanations were dismissed, and his rights were violated. The video footage from Marcus's trial began circulating online. People could see for themselves how Judge Whitman had treated Marcus. They could watch her refuse to look at his evidence and dismiss his explanations. The contrast between Marcus's dignified behavior and the judge's dismissive attitude was stark. People were impressed by how calmly Marcus had handled the situation, even when he was being treated unfairly. Social media users began comparing Marcus to other famous people who had been treated poorly because of their race. They pointed out that even wealth and success could not protect black men from discrimination. The story also sparked discussions about environmental protection and the importance of scientific research. Many people learned for the first time about the work that environmental scientists do to protect lakes and rivers. Young environmental activists were particularly inspired by Marcus's story. They saw him as a role model for how one person could make a real difference in protecting the environment. They were angry that someone doing such important work had been treated so badly. Within 3 days, the story had been covered by news outlets around the world. The BBC ran a story about it in their international news section. Newspapers in Canada, Australia, and Europe picked up the story and wrote their own articles about it. The international coverage focused on what Marcus's case said about America's justice system. Foreign reporters were amazed that a billionaire scientist could be jailed for doing environmental research. They saw it as evidence of serious problems with American law enforcement and courts. Meanwhile, Marcus was still sitting in county jail, largely unaware of the media storm that his case had created. The jail had limited internet access, and Marcus was not following social media closely. He knew that his case had gotten some attention, but he had no idea how big the story had become. Other inmates in the jail began to recognize Marcus from television news reports. Some of them could not believe that a billionaire was sharing their cells. Others were impressed by how humble and respectful Marcus was, despite his wealth and fame. The jail guards also began treating Marcus differently once they realized who he was. Some felt embarrassed about how he had been processed and housed. Others were simply amazed to meet someone so famous and successful. Back outside the jail, the pressure was building on officials to do something about Marcus's case. The governor of Wisconsin received thousands of phone calls and emails demanding that Marcus be released immediately. Environmental groups organized protests outside the courthouse where Marcus had been convicted. Hundreds of people gathered holding signs that said, "Free Marcus Thompson and Justice for Environmental Heroes." The protests were peaceful but determined. People of all ages and backgrounds came together to support Marcus and to protest the injustice of his conviction. Many protesters were environmental activists who knew about Marcus's work and respected his contributions. Legal organizations also began getting involved in the case. The American Civil Liberties Union announced that they were considering filing a lawsuit challenging Marcus's conviction. They argued that his civil rights had been violated during the arrest and trial. The Environmental Defense Fund started a petition calling for Marcus's immediate release. Within 48 hours, over 100,000 people had signed the petition. The petition was sent to the governor, the state attorney general, and other officials. Corporate leaders in the environmental industry also spoke out in support of Marcus. The CEOs of major renewable energy companies issued a joint statement praising Marcus's work and condemning his treatment. Marcus Thompson represents the best of American innovation and environmental stewardship, the statement read. His conviction is not just an injustice to him personally, but a setback for everyone working to protect our planet. The story also began affecting the people who had been involved in Marcus's arrest and conviction. Judge Whitman started receiving angry phone calls and emails from people who had read about the case. Some of the messages were threatening, which forced her to ask for police protection. The game wardens who had arrested Marcus also came under scrutiny. People wanted to know why they had not investigated Marcus's claims more thoroughly. The wardens defended their actions, saying they had followed proper procedures, but many people disagreed. The prosecutor who had handled Marcus's case also faced criticism. Legal experts said that he should have investigated Marcus's background more carefully before proceeding with the prosecution. As the media storm continued to grow, it became clear that this was more than just a story about one person's legal troubles. It had become a national conversation about justice, prejudice, and the treatment of minorities by law enforcement and the courts. People were asking hard questions about how many other cases like Marcus's had happened without anyone noticing. They wondered how many innocent people had been convicted because judges and prosecutors had made assumptions based on appearance or race. The story had also raised awareness about the important work that environmental scientists do. The media storm around Marcus Thompson's case created intense pressure on everyone involved in his arrest and conviction. As the story continued to spread across the nation and around the world, officials at every level began to face serious questions about what had gone wrong. Judge Patricia Whitman found herself at the center of a hurricane of criticism that she had never experienced before. For 15 years, she had been respected as a tough but fair judge. Now suddenly, she was being called names like biased and incompetent by people she had never met. The criticism started with phone calls to her office. Court clerks told Judge Whitman that they were receiving hundreds of calls from angry people demanding that she apologize or resign. The calls came from all over the country. Some callers were polite but firm. Others were angry and rude. Judge Whitman's personal phone number somehow got leaked online, and she started receiving calls at home too. Her family became worried about her safety. Her children, who were adults living in other cities, called to check on her and express their concern. The judge tried to ignore the criticism at first. She told herself that she had done nothing wrong. She had followed the law and made a decision based on the evidence presented in her courtroom. She believed that people who had not been there did not understand the situation. But as more details about Marcus's background came to light, Judge Whitman began to feel less confident about her decision. She learned about his environmental work, his charitable donations, and his legitimate research permits. She realized that she might have made a serious mistake. The Wisconsin State Bar Association announced that they were reviewing Judge Whitman's handling of Marcus's case. This was a serious development, because the Bar Association had the power to discipline judges who acted improperly. The Judicial Commission, which was responsible for investigating complaints against judges, also opened a formal investigation. They began reviewing court records and interviewing people who had witnessed the trial. Legal experts were invited to comment on the case by television news programs and newspapers. Almost all of them criticized Judge Whitman's decision to refuse to examine Marcus's evidence. They said this was a basic violation of due process rights. Professor Robert Chen from the University of Wisconsin Law School appeared on several news programs to discuss the case. A judge's duty is to listen to all evidence and make decisions based on facts, not assumptions, he said. Judge Whitman failed in this basic responsibility. The American Bar Association issued a statement about the case without mentioning Judge Whitman by name. But their message was clear. Judges must examine all relevant evidence presented by defendants and avoid making decisions based on bias or prejudice, and civil rights organizations began calling for Judge Whitman to be removed from her position. The NAACP filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Commission, arguing that her handling of Marcus's case showed a pattern of racial bias. This case demonstrates exactly the kind of prejudice that has infected our justice system for too long, said Dr. Michael Washington, the state president of the NAACP. Judge Whitman saw a black man in simple clothes and assumed he was lying, even when he had documentation to prove his innocence. Women's legal organizations also got involved, pointing out that Judge Whitman's actions reflected poorly on female judges who were working to prove their competence and fairness. Judge Whitman's colleagues on the bench began to distance themselves from her. Some judges who had worked with her for years stopped speaking to her in the courthouse hallways. Others made public statements supporting the investigation into her conduct. The pressure on Judge Whitman became so intense that she had to hire a lawyer to represent her in the investigation. The lawyer, Patricia Morrison, was an expert in judicial ethics who had defended other judges accused of misconduct. Lawyer Morrison advised Judge Whitman to say as little as possible about the case while the investigation was ongoing. Judge Whitman issued a brief statement saying that she stood by her decision and looked forward to the investigation proving that she had acted properly. But privately, Judge Whitman was beginning to have doubts about her handling of the case. She reviewed the court records and video footage of the trial. She saw how dismissive she had been toward Marcus and how quickly she had refused to examine his evidence. Judge Whitman also began to reflect on her career and whether she had treated other defendants unfairly. She thought about cases where she might have made assumptions based on how people looked or dressed. This was an uncomfortable and painful process for her. Meanwhile, the investigation into Marcus's case was expanding beyond just Judge Whitman. The Wisconsin Attorney General's office announced that they were reviewing the entire incident. From the initial arrest through the court proceedings, the game wardens who had arrested Marcus came under scrutiny. Internal affairs investigators interviewed them about why they had not examined Marcus's permits more carefully. The wardens defended their actions, but their supervisors were not satisfied with their explanations. Officer Jenkins, the young warden who had first approached Marcus, was suspended pending the investigation. His supervisor felt that he had acted too quickly in arresting Marcus without properly investigating his claims. Officer Martinez, the more experienced warden, faced criticism for not using his experience to handle the situation better. He was reprimanded but not suspended, though his record was marked with a note about the incident. Sergeant Wilson, who had arrived as backup and made the decision to arrest Marcus, faced the most serious consequences. He was suspended without pay and faced possible termination from his job. The prosecutor who had handled Marcus's case, David Rogers, also came under investigation. The state attorney general's office wanted to know why he had not researched Marcus's background before proceeding with the prosecution. Rogers defended his actions by saying that he had relied on the police report and had no reason to doubt the officer's account. But legal experts said that prosecutors had a duty to investigate cases thoroughly, especially when defendants claimed to have permits or official authorization. The public defender who had represented Marcus, Lisa Chen, was not disciplined because she was overworked and had limited resources. But the case highlighted the problems with the public defender system and the need for better funding for legal representation for poor defendants. Legal reform organizations used Marcus's case as an example of why the justice system needed changes. They pointed out that if Marcus had not been wealthy enough to eventually hire good lawyers, he might have served his full sentence without anyone ever learning the truth. The case also sparked discussions about training for police officers and judges. Many people argued that law enforcement officials needed better education about unconscious bias and how it could affect their decision-making. Some police departments around the country began reviewing their own procedures for handling cases involving people who claim to have special permits or authorization. They wanted to avoid making the same mistakes that had been made in Marcus's case. Law schools started using Marcus's case as an example in classes about judicial ethics and due process. Students learned about the importance of examining all evidence and avoiding assumptions based on appearance. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources also faced questions about their role in the situation. Critics asked why they had not done more to protect Marcus when he was arrested while doing work for them. Dr. Patricia Wells, who supervised the lake restoration project, said that her department would develop better procedures for identifying and protecting authorized researchers. She also said they would provide researchers with better identification and documentation. The controversy also affected the Lake Winnebago restoration project itself. Some state legislators questioned whether the state should continue working with Thompson Environmental Solutions, given the negative publicity surrounding the case. But environmental groups strongly supported continuing the project. They argued that Marcus's work was too important to be disrupted by what they called a judicial mistake, and Dr. Wells assured the public that the restoration project would continue and that Marcus's arrest had not affected the scientific work. She said that other team members had taken over Marcus's duties while he was in jail. As the investigation continued, more details about the case became public. Court records showed that Marcus had indeed had all the proper permits and documentation. GPS data from his boat confirmed that he had been within the authorized research area. The scientific equipment found in Marcus's boat was examined by experts, who confirmed that it was sophisticated water quality testing equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars. This was clearly not ordinary fishing gear. The investigation also revealed that Marcus had been doing this kind of research work for months without any problems. He had established routines and relationships with other researchers and state officials. He was well known and respected in the environmental community. All of this evidence made it clear that Marcus's arrest and conviction had been based on misunderstanding and prejudice rather than facts. The people who were supposed to protect justice had failed to do their jobs properly. As the investigation neared its conclusion, everyone involved knew that there would have to be consequences. 6 months after Marcus Thompson's arrest, the full investigation was complete, and the time for accountability had arrived. The state of Wisconsin faced one of the most embarrassing judicial failures in its history, and officials at every level knew that dramatic action was needed to restore public trust. The first major development came when the Wisconsin Attorney General, Maria Rodriguez, held a press conference to announce the results of the investigation. Standing before a room full of reporters and cameras, she delivered a statement that would change everything for Marcus Thompson. After a thorough investigation into the arrest and conviction of Marcus Thompson, we have determined that a serious miscarriage of justice occurred, Attorney General Rodriguez announced. Mr. Thompson was lawfully conducting environmental research when he was arrested. He had proper permits and authorization for his work. The charges against him should never have been filed, the Attorney General continued. Effective immediately, all charges against Marcus Thompson are being dismissed. The state of Wisconsin formally apologizes to Mr. Thompson and his family for this injustice. We will be taking steps to ensure that nothing like this happens again. The press conference was broadcast live on television and streamed online. Within minutes, the news was spreading across social media. People who had been following Marcus's case celebrated the announcement as a victory for justice. Marcus Thompson himself was released from county jail that same afternoon. He had served only 15 days of his 30-day sentence. But those 15 days had changed his life and the lives of many others. As Marcus walked out of the jail, he was greeted by a crowd of supporters, reporters, and television cameras. He wore the same simple clothes he had been arrested in, but now everyone knew who he really was and what he represented. Marcus spoke briefly to the assembled crowd. His words were humble and gracious, showing the same dignity that had impressed people throughout his ordeal. "I want to thank everyone who worked to bring the truth to light," Marcus said. "This experience has been difficult for my family and me, but I hope it will lead to positive changes that help other people who face similar situations." Marcus also thanked Jenny Martinez, the court reporter whose curiosity had started the investigation that led to his freedom. "Ms. Martinez showed courage in questioning what seemed wrong to her," he said. "Her work reminds us that ordinary citizens can make a difference when they stand up for what is right." The consequences for those who had wronged Marcus were swift and significant. Judge Patricia Whitman faced the most serious punishment. After a thorough review by the Judicial Commission, she was formally censured for her handling of Marcus's case. The censure was a serious disciplinary action that would remain on Judge Whitman's record for the rest of her career. The commission found that she had violated judicial ethics by refusing to examine relevant evidence and by allowing bias to influence her decision-making. As part of her punishment, Judge Whitman was required to complete 40 hours of training on unconscious bias and judicial ethics. She was also required to write a formal apology to Marcus Thompson, which was made public. In her apology letter, Judge Whitman acknowledged her mistakes. "I failed to give Mr. Thompson the fair hearing that every defendant deserves," she wrote. "I allowed my assumptions to cloud my judgment, and I deeply regret the harm this caused to Mr. Thompson and his family." Judge Whitman was not removed from the bench, but her reputation was permanently damaged. Many people felt that she should have lost her job entirely. She chose to take early retirement 6 months later, ending a career that had been defined by its final, most serious mistake. The police officers involved in Marcus's arrest also faced consequences. Sergeant Wilson, who had made the decision to arrest Marcus, was terminated from his job. An internal investigation found that he had failed to properly investigate Marcus's claims and had acted with unnecessary aggression. Officer Jenkins, the young warden who had first approached Marcus, was suspended for 30 days without pay and required to complete additional training. The department felt that his inexperience had contributed to the problems, but that he deserved a second chance. Officer Martinez, the more experienced warden, received a written reprimand and was required to undergo retraining. His supervisors felt that he should have used his experience to handle the situation better. The prosecutor, David Rogers, was not formally disciplined, but his handling of the case was criticized by his supervisors. He was required to complete additional training on prosecutorial ethics and case investigation. The most significant change came in the form of new policies and procedures designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources developed new identification cards for authorized researchers that would be immediately recognizable to law enforcement officers. The state also created a database that police officers could access to verify research permits and authorizations. This would prevent future situations where legitimate researchers were arrested because officers could not verify their credentials. Police departments around Wisconsin implemented new training programs on unconscious bias and the proper handling of cases involving people who claim to have special permits or authorization. The training emphasized the importance of thorough investigation before making arrests. The court system also made changes. New guidelines were established requiring judges to examine all evidence presented by defendants, regardless of the nature of the case or the appearance of the defendant. Marcus Thompson used his experience to create positive change on a much larger scale. He established the Thompson Justice Foundation with an initial donation of $25 million. The foundation's mission was to provide legal defense for people who face discrimination. In the justice system, the Thompson Justice Foundation quickly became one of the most important civil rights organizations in the country. It provided free legal representation for people who could not afford good lawyers and who faced bias in the courts. The foundation also worked to train police officers and judges about unconscious bias and fair treatment. Marcus hired a team of experienced civil rights lawyers to run the foundation. They took on cases involving people of all races and backgrounds who had been treated unfairly by the justice system. Many of these cases would never have received attention without the foundation's support. The foundation also created scholarship programs for students who wanted to become lawyers or judges. Marcus believed that having more diverse people in the legal system would help prevent future injustices like the one he had experienced. Marcus continued his environmental work with even more passion than before. The Lake Winnebago restoration project was completed successfully, and the lake's water quality improved dramatically. The project became a model for environmental restoration efforts around the world. Marcus used his newfound fame to speak about environmental issues at conferences and universities. He talked about the importance of protecting water resources and the need for more research into environmental problems. His story inspired many young people to pursue careers in environmental science. The relationship between Marcus and law enforcement in Wisconsin improved significantly after the incident. Marcus worked with police departments to develop better training programs for officers who might encounter environmental researchers in the field. He also partnered with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources to create a program that educated law enforcement officers about environmental research and the types of permits that researchers needed. This program was eventually adopted by other states. Marcus's company, Thompson Environmental Solutions, continued to grow and expand its work. The company took on more lake and river restoration projects, creating jobs and improving water quality in communities across the country. The publicity from Marcus's case actually helped his business, as more people became aware of his company's important work. Government agencies and private organizations began hiring Thompson Environmental Solutions for projects they might not have considered before. Marcus also used his experience to advocate for criminal justice reform. He testified before state legislators about the need for better training for police officers and judges. He spoke about how unconscious bias could lead to serious injustices even when people meant well. His testimony was particularly powerful because he was not an activist or politician, but a successful businessman who had experienced injustice firsthand. Legislators listened to him in a way they might not have listened to traditional civil rights advocates. The media attention around Marcus's case had lasting effects beyond his personal situation. It sparked a national conversation about racial bias in the justice system and the treatment of minorities by law enforcement. Many other cases of injustice came to light as reporters and activists began looking more carefully at how the justice system treated different groups of people. Some of these cases led to overturned convictions and changes in police procedures. The case also raised awareness about the important work that environmental scientists do. Many people learned for the first time about water quality research and lake restoration projects. This increased public support for environmental protection efforts.